The hook that changed everything. My name is Natalia Greer. And the moment I walked into that break room 2 years ago, saw my boyfriend of 3 years kissing my colleague, everything inside me died. But from that death, something far more powerful was born. The fluorescent lights in the office break room buzzed overhead like angry wasps as I stood frozen in the doorway. The stack of client files I had been carrying slipped from my numb fingers, scattered across the linoleum floor like fallen leaves. My heart hammered against my ribcage so violently I thought it might burst through my chest. There they were. Marcus, my Marcus, with his hands tangled in Sophie's auburn hair. Her manicured fingers clutched at his shirt. The same shirt I had ironed for him that morning while he told me about his late meeting with investors. The same shirt I had kissed him goodbye in, trusting, believing, loving. The world tilted sideways. 3 years of my life. 3 years of shared dreams and whispered promises. 3 years of building a future together. All crumbling in the space of a single heartbeat. The engagement ring he had given me just 6 months earlier suddenly felt like a lead weight on my finger. They broke apart at the sound of my files hitting the floor. Sophie's eyes went wide with shock, her lipstick smeared across her mouth like a scarlet confession. Marcus turned, his face cycling through confusion, recognition, and finally settling on something that looked almost like relief. Relief. As if he had been waiting for this moment. As if being caught was somehow easier than continuing the charade. Natalia. He started, but I held up my hand. The silence in that break room was deafening. I could hear the coffee machine gurgling in the corner, the distant sound of keyboards clicking from the main office, the rapid breathing of two people who had just destroyed everything I thought I knew about my life. I looked at Sophie first. Sweet Sophie with her kind smile and her offers to help with projects. Sophie who had sat with me during lunch breaks, listening to me gush about wedding plans. Sophie who had helped me pick out Marcus's birthday gift just last month. Then I looked at Marcus, the man who had held me when I cried about my father's death. The man who had promised me forever just half a year ago. The man who had looked into my eyes this very morning and told me he loved me. My heart was not just broken, it was obliterated. But in that moment of complete devastation, something else stirred deep within me. Something cold and calculating and utterly ruthless. I bent down slowly, methodically, and gathered my scattered files. My hands did not shake. My voice did not waver. I stood up, spine straight, and looked directly into Sophie's terrified eyes. "Enjoy this moment," I said, my voice eerily calm. "It is the last time you will be above me in any way." Then I turned to Marcus, the man who had just ripped my world apart. "We are done," I said simply. "I will have your things packed by tomorrow evening." And then I walked out. I did not run. I did not cry. I did not scream or throw things or make a scene that would give the office gossips something to whisper about for weeks. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and got back to work. Because in that break room, watching the two people I trusted most in the world betray me, I had made a decision that would reshape everything. I was going to rise. And Sophie, dear sweet Sophie, was going to watch me do it. The first night was the hardest. I sat in my empty apartment, Marcus's belongings packed neatly in boxes by the door, and let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. The tears came then, hot and angry and seemingly endless. I cried for the future we had planned, for the trust that had been shattered, for the naive woman I had been just hours before. But when the sun rose the next morning, I was done crying. I threw myself into work with a fury that surprised even me. The Peterson account that had been languishing on my desk for weeks. I completed it in 2 days with a presentation so polished and innovative that even Janet Morrison, our notoriously difficult department head, stopped by my desk to compliment it. "This is excellent work, Natalia," she said, her usually stern expression softening with approval. "The client is going to be thrilled." I smiled and thanked her. But inside, something darker was growing. Every compliment, every successful project, every small victory was another step up a ladder that Sophie would never be able to climb. Because while I was transforming my pain into productivity, Sophie was making mistakes. Small ones at first. A missed deadline here. A confused client there. Nothing that would normally raise eyebrows. But I noticed everything. I watched her stumble through presentations that would have been flawless before. I saw her struggle with accounts that should have been routine. Guilt was eating her alive. Good. Marcus tried to contact me. Of course he did. Text messages that I deleted without reading. Voicemails that I never played. Flowers delivered to my office that went straight into the trash. He even showed up at my apartment one evening, standing outside my door like some romantic hero in a movie, begging me to listen. I called the police and had him removed for trespassing. The affair had consequences for both of them. Marcus lost his job when his company found out he had been having inappropriate relationships that violated their ethics policy. Sophie still had her job. But barely. Her work quality had plummeted so dramatically that rumors were already circulating about possible disciplinary action. But I was not satisfied with their organic destruction. I wanted more. I wanted to build something so magnificent, so undeniably successful, that Sophie would have no choice but to acknowledge my superiority every single day. I wanted her to watch me rise while she remained exactly where she was, trapped in the mediocrity of her own making. So I began to plan. The Hamilton Industries account was the opportunity one had been waiting for. It was a massive contract, worth more than $3 million annually, and the kind of client that could make or break careers. The entire office was buzzing with rumors about who would be assigned to pitch for their business. Senior partners were already positioning themselves, calling in favors and making backroom deals. But I had something they did not. I had nothing left to lose. I spent 3 weeks crafting a pitch that was not just good, it was revolutionary. I researched every aspect of Hamilton Industries, from their corporate history to their CEO's personal interests. I analyzed their current marketing strategy and identified 17 specific areas where we could improve their market penetration. I created mock campaigns for their 3 main product lines that were so detailed and innovative that they looked like they had cost millions to develop. I worked 18-hour days, surviving on coffee and determination. My apartment became a war room. Walls covered with charts and graphs and competitor analysis. I studied their industry until I knew more about industrial manufacturing than some of their own employees. And then I did something that no one expected. I requested a meeting with Janet Morrison and asked to be considered for the Hamilton account. The silence in her office was so profound I could hear the traffic from the street below. "Natalia," she said finally, her voice carefully neutral, "this is a senior-level account. You have been with us for less than 3 years." "Yes, ma'am," I replied, placing my portfolio on her desk. "But I have something that experience alone cannot provide." "And what is that?" "Hunger." She opened my portfolio and began to read. I watched her face change as she absorbed the depth and sophistication of my research. Her eyebrows rose when she saw my market analysis. Her lips parted slightly when she reviewed my proposed campaigns. "How long did this take you to prepare?" she asked without looking up. 3 weeks of preparation, I answered honestly. 3 years of observation. She closed the portfolio and leaned back in her chair, studying me with new eyes. "You realize," she said slowly, "that if I give you this opportunity and you fail, it could end your career here." I met her gaze steadily. "Yes, ma'am. I also realize that if I succeed, it could make my career here." She was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "The presentation is next Friday at 9 a.m. You will have 1 hour to convince Hamilton Industries that we deserve their business. Do not disappoint me, Natalia." I would not dream of it. As I left her office, I caught sight of Sophie at her desk. She was staring at her computer screen, but I could tell she was not really seeing it. Her shoulders were hunched with defeat, her usual bright demeanor replaced by something gray and hollow. For just a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered that night in the break room. Remembered the way she had looked at me with pity rather than remorse. As if I was the obstacle standing in the way of true love rather than the victim of ultimate betrayal. The sympathy evaporated like morning dew. The Hamilton Industries presentation was scheduled for 9 a.m. on a Friday morning, but I arrived at the office at 6. I needed time to set up, to center myself. to transform into the version of myself that could command a room full of executives who were twice my age and 3 times my experience level. The conference room looked different in the early morning light. Larger somehow, more intimidating. The massive mahogany table that seated 20 people seemed to stretch endlessly before me. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city skyline, a reminder of just how high the stakes were. I set up my presentation materials with surgical precision. Every slide was perfectly aligned, every handout meticulously organized, every visual aid positioned for maximum impact. I had rehearsed this presentation so many times that I could deliver it in my sleep, but I ran through it 3 more times anyway. By 8:30, the Hamilton Industries team began to arrive. Richard Hamilton himself was exactly what I had expected from my research. Tall and distinguished with silver hair, and the kind of presence that commanded immediate respect. His CFO, Patricia Chen, was younger but no less formidable, her sharp eyes already evaluating every detail of our conference room setup. The marketing director, James Wright, looked skeptical from the moment he walked in, as if he had already decided that no one at our firm could possibly understand his industry well enough to be useful. Janet Morrison introduced me with words that sounded supportive, but carried an undertone of caution. Everyone in the room understood that I was taking an enormous professional risk, and that my failure would reflect poorly on her judgment as much as my abilities. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "I would like you to meet Natalia Greer, who will be presenting our proposal for your account today." I could see the surprise in their faces. They had been expecting someone older, more senior, more traditionally qualified. Instead, they were getting a young woman in a sharp navy suit who looked like she had something to prove. "Perfect. Good morning," I began, my voice clear and confident despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Thank you for giving us this opportunity to show you how we can transform Hamilton Industries from a successful company into a market-dominating force." For the next 60 minutes, I gave the performance of my lifetime. I walked them through their current market position with analysis so detailed that Richard Hamilton actually leaned forward in surprise. I identified their competitors' weaknesses with surgical precision, then showed exactly how we could exploit those vulnerabilities. I presented campaign concepts that were not just creative but strategically brilliant, each one designed to capture market share in ways their current marketing team had never considered. But the moment that sealed the deal was when I addressed their biggest concern, the concern they had not even voiced yet. "I know what you are thinking," I said, making eye contact with each executive in turn. "You are wondering if someone my age, someone with my level of experience, can really understand an industry as complex as industrial manufacturing." Nods around the table confirmed my assessment. "The answer is no," I continued, watching their expressions change to confusion. "I cannot understand your industry the way someone who has worked in it for 20 years can understand it. But that is exactly why you need me." I clicked to my next slide, which showed a detailed breakdown of their current marketing strategy. "Your current approach is sophisticated, professional, and completely predictable. Every campaign looks exactly like what your competitors are doing, because they are all designed by people who think exactly like your competitors think. You are not losing market share because your products are inferior. You are losing it because your marketing is invisible." I showed them mock-ups of campaigns that were unlike anything in their industry, bold and innovative approaches that would make Hamilton Industries impossible to ignore. I demonstrated how we could leverage their manufacturing excellence in ways that would resonate with modern consumers, even in B2B markets. By the time I finished, the room was completely silent. Richard Hamilton was the first to speak. "Ms. Greer," he said, his voice thoughtful, "this is the most innovative presentation we have seen in years. You have clearly invested significant time in understanding our business." "Yes, sir," I replied, "because your success will be my success." Patricia Chen asked several detailed questions about implementation timelines and budget allocations, all of which I answered with the kind of specificity that demonstrated just how thoroughly I had prepared. James Wright, who had looked skeptical an hour earlier, was now taking notes on my responses. When they excused themselves to deliberate, I remained in the conference room, allowing myself to finally acknowledge just how much this moment meant. Win or lose, I had proven something important to myself. I had taken my pain, my betrayal, my complete devastation, and transformed it into something powerful and productive. But I wanted more than personal satisfaction. I wanted to win. 20 minutes later, they returned. Ms. Greer, Richard Hamilton announced with a slight smile. Hamilton Industries would be honored to work with you and your firm. We look forward to a long and profitable relationship. The relief was so intense I had to grip the edge of the table to keep from swaying. But I kept my expression professional, my voice steady. Thank you, Mr. Hamilton. You will not regret this decision. As they filed out of the conference room, exchanging business cards and scheduling follow-up meetings, Janet Morrison approached me with an expression I had never seen before. Pride. Exceptional work. Natalia, she said quietly. Truly exceptional. Thank you, Janet. How does senior account manager sound to you? My heart stopped. It sounds perfect. As I gathered my presentation materials, hands finally beginning to shake with the aftermath of adrenaline, I looked through the conference room windows toward the main office floor. I could see Sophie at her desk, probably wondering what all the commotion had been about, oblivious to the fact that her former victim had just secured the biggest account in the company's history. This was just the beginning. The promotion to senior account manager came with a corner office, a significant salary increase, and something far more valuable than either of those things: respect. Suddenly, colleagues who had barely acknowledged my existence before were seeking my opinion on their projects. Senior partners were inviting me to strategy meetings that had previously been reserved for the inner circle. My success with Hamilton Industries had opened doors that I had not even known existed. But the sweetest part was watching Sophie realize what was happening. She had been so focused on her own guilt and shame that she had barely noticed my meteoric rise until it was impossible to ignore. The morning after my promotion was announced, I watched her face as she read the company-wide email from Janet Morrison congratulating me on my new position. The color drained from her cheeks like water from a broken dam. She looked up from her computer, her eyes finding mine across the office floor, and for a moment, the full weight of what she had lost hit her. Not just Marcus. Though their relationship had ended badly when he lost his job and became bitter and desperate, she had lost the opportunity to watch me succeed, to potentially succeed alongside me, to be part of something extraordinary. Instead, she was exactly where she had been 2 years ago. Same desk, same title, same mediocre performance reviews that kept her trapped in professional purgatory. I did not smile at her. I did not acknowledge her stare. I simply returned to my work, because I had far more important things to focus on than Sophie's regrets. The Hamilton Industries account was exceeding all expectations. Our first campaign, a bold reimagining of how they presented their manufacturing capabilities, had resulted in a 37% increase in qualified leads within the first quarter. Their CEO was so pleased that he personally called Janet Morrison to praise our work, specifically mentioning my contributions. But I was not content with one success. I began actively pursuing additional high-value accounts, using my Hamilton Industries credentials as proof of my capabilities. The Morrison Group, a construction conglomerate worth nearly $10 million annually. Apex Technologies, a software company looking to break into new markets. Silverstone Financial, a private equity firm that wanted to improve their public image. One by one, I pitched them. One by one, I won them. My client portfolio grew from one major account to 5, then to 8, then to 12. Each success built upon the previous one, creating momentum that seemed unstoppable. I was working longer hours than ever before, but it did not feel like work anymore. It felt like destiny. Janet Morrison began including me in executive-level meetings, asking for my input on company-wide strategic decisions. Other departments started requesting my collaboration on their projects. The office dynamics shifted as it became clear that I was no longer just another junior employee, but a rising star whose trajectory seemed limitless. And through it all, Sophie watched. She watched me present to executives while she struggled with basic client management. She watched me receive praise and recognition while her own performance reviews grew increasingly critical. She watched me transform from the heartbroken woman she had helped destroy into something she could never hope to become. Powerful. But my rise was not without challenges. Success at this level required sacrifices that I had not anticipated. My personal life became non-existent as I devoted every waking hour to building my career. I had no time for dating, no energy for friendships, no space for anything that did not directly contribute to my professional advancement. Some nights, as I sat alone in my apartment reviewing client proposals, I wondered if this was what I really wanted. The loneliness was sometimes overwhelming, the pressure relentless, the constant need to prove myself exhausting. But then I would think about that night in the break room. I would remember the way Marcus had looked relieved to be caught. I would recall the pity in Sophie's eyes, as if I was something to be sorry for rather than someone who deserved better. And the doubt would disappear. This was not just about career success anymore. This was about proving that betrayal could not destroy me, that I could take the worst thing that had ever happened to me and use it as fuel for the best thing that had ever happened to me. I was not just climbing the corporate ladder. I was transcending it. 18 months after my promotion to senior account manager, Janet Morrison called me into her office for what she described as an important conversation. I had been expecting this meeting, hoping for it, but I still felt my pulse quicken as I walked across the main office floor toward her corner suite. The autumn light streaming through her windows cast everything in golden hues, making the moment feel almost cinematic in its significance. Janet was standing behind her desk, a folder in her hands, and an expression on her face that I could not quite read. "Please sit down, Natalia," she said, gesturing toward the leather chairs across from her desk. I settled into the chair, crossed my legs professionally, and waited. "In my 23 years with this company," she began, "I have never seen anyone accomplish what you have accomplished in such a short time. Your client retention rate is 96%. Your accounts have generated more revenue in the past year than some of our senior partners manage in 3 years. You have single-handedly elevated this firm's reputation in ways that I am still discovering." My heart was hammering, but I kept my expression neutral. "Thank you, Janet. I have had excellent support from the entire team." She smiled at my diplomatic response, but continued as if I had not spoken. "The board has been discussing the future of our operations department," she said, opening the folder and glancing at its contents. "We need someone with vision, someone who understands both the creative and business sides of what we do, someone who can lead this company into the next phase of its growth." The words hung in the air between us like a promise. "We would like to offer you the position of Director of Operations." The silence that followed was profound. Director of Operations was not just a promotion. It was a transformation. It meant overseeing multiple departments, managing senior-level staff, making decisions that would affect the entire company's direction. It meant becoming Sophie's boss. I started, then stopped, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered. "I know it is a significant responsibility," Janet continued. "You would be the youngest director in the company's history. There will be people who question whether you are ready for this level of authority. But after watching your performance over the past 2 years, I have no doubts about your capabilities." I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The betrayal that had nearly destroyed me. The long nights spent building presentations while my heart slowly healed. The risks I had taken. The failures I had learned from. The successes I had earned through sheer determination. Most of all, I thought about Sophie, still sitting at the same desk she had occupied when she destroyed my life, about to become my subordinate. "I accept," I said without hesitation. Janet smiled. The first genuinely warm expression I had ever seen from her. "Welcome to the executive team, Director Greer." My first day as Director of Operations began at 6 a.m. with a meeting I had been anticipating for 2 years. The senior staff meeting where I would be introduced in my new role, where the entire department would learn that their former colleague was now their supervisor, where Sophie would discover that the woman she had betrayed was now in complete control of her professional future. I arrived early to prepare the conference room. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted a few moments alone to center myself for what was about to happen. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the mahogany table where I would soon take my place at the head. As the senior staff began to arrive, I watched their faces carefully. Most of them looked curious about our new director, unaware that they already knew who I was. A few seemed nervous, probably wondering if the new leadership would mean changes to their comfortable routines. Sophie was the last to arrive. She hurried through the conference room doors at exactly 9 a.m., slightly breathless and clutching a coffee cup like a lifeline. Her hair was less polished than usual, her blouse wrinkled in a way that suggested she had grabbed it from a laundry basket rather than a closet. She took her usual seat near the middle of the table, still not looking toward the front of the room where I stood, and began shuffling through a stack of papers with the distracted energy of someone who was perpetually behind on everything. Janet Morrison entered precisely at 9:05. "Good morning, everyone," she announced, commanding immediate attention from the 12 people seated around the table. "I have called this meeting to introduce you to our new Director of Operations, someone who has demonstrated exceptional leadership capabilities and strategic vision over the past 2 years." Sophie finally looked up from her papers, her eyes moving toward the front of the room with mild interest. Our gazes met. The coffee cup slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, hitting the table with a ceramic clank that seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Coffee splashed across her papers, her notebook, her lap, but she did not seem to notice. Her face went white, then red, then white again. "I would like you all to welcome Director Natalia Greer," Janet continued, either unaware of or choosing to ignore Sophie's dramatic reaction. Polite applause filled the room, but all I could hear was the sound of Sophie's rapid breathing. All I could see was the way her hands trembled as she tried to process what was happening. I stood at the head of the table, exactly where I belonged, and smiled. "Good morning, everyone," I said, my voice clear and confident. "I am looking forward to working with all of you as we take this department to new levels of excellence." I let my gaze sweep across the room, making eye contact with each team member, before finally settling on Sophie. She was staring at me with an expression of complete shock, her mouth slightly open as if she wanted to speak but could not find the words. "I know this transition represents significant changes for everyone," I continued, still looking directly at her. "But I want to assure you that my primary focus is on supporting each of you in achieving your professional goals, assuming those goals align with the department's objectives." The implied threat was subtle but unmistakable. Sophie heard it. I could tell by the way her shoulders tensed, but the rest of the staff simply nodded appreciatively. "Now," I said, opening the folder I had placed on the table, "let us discuss our priorities for the coming quarter." For the next 45 minutes, I led my first staff meeting with the kind of confidence and authority that surprised even me. I outlined new efficiency initiatives, discussed upcoming client presentations, assigned responsibilities with clear expectations and deadlines. And through it all, Sophie said nothing. She sat frozen in her chair, occasionally nodding when directly addressed, but otherwise seeming to exist in a state of suspended disbelief. The papers in front of her remained stained with coffee, forgotten in the face of her new reality. When the meeting finally concluded and people began filing out, Sophie remained seated, staring at the table as if it might provide answers to questions she was afraid to ask. "Sophie," I said as the last of the other staff members left the conference room, "could you please stay behind for a moment? I would like to discuss your current project load." She looked up at me with eyes that held a mixture of fear and resignation. "Of course, Director Greer." The title sounded foreign in her mouth, like she was testing the weight of words she had never expected to say. Janet Morrison paused at the door, glancing back at us with a slight frown. "Is everything all right here?" she asked. "Perfectly fine," I replied smoothly. "Sophie and I have some history working together, so I wanted to touch base with her personally about the transition." Janet nodded and left, closing the door behind her with a soft click that seemed to seal Sophie and me into our own private universe of consequences. We sat in silence for a long moment, the morning sun casting long shadows across the mahogany table between us. Sophie's breathing had returned to normal, but her hands were still trembling slightly as she gathered her coffee-stained papers. Finally, she spoke. "I suppose you think this is poetic justice," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I considered her words carefully before responding. "I think this is the natural result of choices we both made," I said. "You chose to betray someone who trusted you. I chose to transform that betrayal into motivation. Here we are." "Natalia," she started, then stopped, seeming to realize that using my first name might not be appropriate anymore. "Director Greer, I know you have every right to hate me. I know what Marcus and I did was wrong. I have regretted it every day since it happened." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or false sincerity, but saw only genuine remorse and exhaustion. "Your regret," I said finally, "while perhaps authentic, does not change the fact that you made a conscious decision to participate in something that devastated another person's life. It does not erase the trust you violated or the pain you caused." Tears were beginning to form in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I know," she whispered. "I know that. But Marcus said. He told me that you and he were having problems, that the relationship was already over. That I was the obstacle standing between him and true love." I finished for her. "Yes. I imagine he painted me as the villain in whatever story he told you. It is much easier to justify betrayal when you can convince yourself that the person you are betraying somehow deserves it." Sophie flinched as if I had slapped her. "That is not. I did not." "You did not what? You did not know he was lying? You did not realize that a man willing to cheat on his girlfriend might also be willing to lie about the state of their relationship?" The tears she had been fighting finally spilled over, running down her cheeks in silent streams. "I was lonely," she said. So quietly I had to lean forward to hear her. "I had been alone for so long, and he made me feel special. Wanted. He said he loved me. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something that might have been sympathy. Sophie was not evil, just weak. She had allowed her loneliness and insecurity to override her moral compass. Had chosen temporary validation over doing what was right. But sympathy was a luxury I could not afford. "Where is Marcus now?" I asked. Her shoulders sagged. "Gone," she said. "He left town after he lost his job. Said he needed a fresh start. Somewhere people did not know about his mistakes." "And did he invite you to join him in this fresh start?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Marcus had used her, just as surely as he had used me. The difference was that Sophie had been a willing participant in her own exploitation, while I had been an innocent victim. "Sophie," I said, my voice becoming businesslike again, "let me be very clear about how this is going to work. You are going to continue doing your job, hopefully with more attention to detail and professionalism than you have shown recently. I am going to evaluate your performance based solely on the quality of your work and your contribution to this department's success." She looked up at me with something that might have been hope. "I will not make your life miserable out of spite," I continued. "But I will also not give you special treatment or consideration because of our history. You will earn whatever success you achieve here, just like everyone else." "Thank you," she whispered. "Do not thank me yet," I said, standing and walking toward the door. "Prove that you deserve to be here. Prove that you are more than the sum of your worst decisions." As I reached for the door handle, she called my name. "Director Greer?" I turned back to her. "For whatever it is worth," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "I am proud of you. What you have accomplished. It is extraordinary. You deserve all of this success." I studied her face one last time, looking for any trace of insincerity or hidden agenda, but found only genuine admiration and regret. "What I deserve," I said quietly, "is what I have earned. Nothing more, nothing less." And with that, I left her alone in the conference room, sitting among her coffee-stained papers and the wreckage of choices she could never unmake. The months that followed my promotion established a routine that was both satisfying and surreal. Every morning, I arrived at my corner office overlooking the city skyline, reviewed reports from my department heads, and made decisions that affected dozens of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. And every morning, I could see Sophie through my office windows, sitting at her same desk, typing reports that would eventually cross my desk for approval. The power dynamic was not lost on either of us. She had adapted to our new professional relationship with a mixture of resignation and determination that I found almost admirable. Her work quality improved dramatically, as if having her former victim as her supervisor had finally motivated her to perform at her true potential. She arrived early, stayed late, and completed every assignment with meticulous attention to detail. But there was something else in her behavior, something that took me several weeks to identify. Penance. Sophie was not just doing her job well. She was trying to atone for her past actions through professional excellence. Every perfectly formatted report, every successfully completed project, every client interaction that exceeded expectations was her way of saying what she could not say directly. I am sorry. I can be better. Please forgive me. It might have been touching if I had been interested in her redemption. But forgiveness was not on my agenda. I had not spent 2 years building an empire of success just to absolve the people who had tried to destroy me. I had built it to prove that they could not, that I was stronger than their betrayal, more determined than their cruelty, more valuable than their small-minded selfishness. My focus remained on the future, not the past. Under my leadership, the operations department was thriving in ways that surprised even Janet Morrison. Client retention rates reached 98%. Revenue increased by 47% in my first 6 months as director. Employee satisfaction surveys showed dramatic improvements in morale and job fulfillment. I was not just managing, I was transforming. The Hamilton Industries account, which had launched my career, expanded to include 3 additional divisions of their company. Richard Hamilton had become not just a client but something approaching a mentor, offering insights into corporate strategy that were invaluable for someone at my level. You have a gift for this, Natalia, he told me during one of our quarterly review meetings. Most people your age are still figuring out what they want to do with their lives. You are already changing the world. His words were gratifying, but they also carried a weight of expectation that was sometimes overwhelming. Success at this level meant that failure was not just personal, it was public. Every decision I made was scrutinized. Every strategy one implemented was analyzed. Every mistake I made was magnified. The pressure was immense. But pressure had become my natural environment. I had learned to thrive in situations that would have crushed the person I used to be. The naive young woman who had believed that love and trust were enough to protect her from betrayal. That woman was gone, replaced by someone harder, smarter, more resilient. Someone who could look betrayal in the face and transform it into triumph. The opportunity that would change everything came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in late November. Janet Morrison knocked on my office door with an expression that I had learned to recognize as significant news. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked, stepping into my office and closing the door behind her. "Of course," I said, gesturing toward the leather chairs by my window. "What can I do for you?" She sat down heavily, as if the weight of whatever she was carrying was becoming too much to bear standing. "I am retiring," she said without preamble. The words hit me like a physical blow. Janet Morrison had been with the company for over 2 decades, had been my champion and mentor, had taken risks on my behalf that few executives would have taken. "When?" I asked, trying to process what her departure would mean for my own career trajectory. "End of the fiscal year," she replied. "March 31st. I have been thinking about it for months. But watching what you have accomplished has convinced me that the company is in good hands for the future." "Janet," I started, but she held up her hand. "The board has already begun discussing succession plans," she continued. "There are several external candidates being considered. People with decades of experience at other firms. But I have recommended that they seriously consider promoting from within." My heart stopped. The position requires someone who understands this company's culture, who has proven their ability to lead and inspire, who has the vision to take us to the next level. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle between us. "I have recommended you for the position of Chief Operating Officer." The silence in my office was absolute. Outside, Rain continued to drum against the windows, but inside, time seemed to have stopped entirely. Chief Operating Officer, second in command of the entire company, responsible for every aspect of daily operations. The person who would shape the future of an organization that employed over 300 people and managed accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I know it seems overwhelming, Janet said, misinterpreting my silence. And I know there will be significant opposition from some board members who believe the position requires more traditional experience. But your results speak for themselves. Natalia, you have transformed every department you have touched. I found my voice, though it sounded strange to my own ears. What would I need to do? Present to the board, she replied immediately, as if she had been waiting for this question. A comprehensive vision for the company's future. Demonstrate that you understand not just your current role, but the strategic challenges we face as an organization. When? The final presentations are scheduled for the first week of February. You would have approximately 10 weeks to prepare. 10 weeks to create a presentation that could either elevate me to the highest levels of corporate leadership or end my career in spectacular failure. But failure was not an option. It had not been an option since that night in the break room when I had made a promise to Sophie about never being above me again. It certainly was not an option now, when I was so close to achieving something that would make that promise look prophetic. I would be honored to be considered, I said. Janet smiled, the expression transforming her usually stern features into something warm and proud. I was hoping you would say that. As she left my office, promising to send me detailed information about the presentation requirements, I remained seated by the window, staring out at the rain-soaked city below. Somewhere out there, Sophie was probably getting ready to leave work, gathering her things from the same desk she had occupied for 4 years, heading home to whatever small apartment and quiet life she had built from the ruins of her poor choices. And here I was, being offered the opportunity to become the second most powerful person in a company that employed her. The irony was almost poetic. But there was still work to be done. 10 weeks was not a long time to prepare for the most important presentation of my life. I would need to analyze every aspect of the company's operations, identify opportunities for growth and efficiency, develop strategies that were both innovative and practical. I would need to become not just a candidate for Chief Operating Officer, but the obvious choice. The rain continued to fall against my windows, but inside my office, I felt only the warm glow of possibilities unfolding. The next 10 weeks became a blur of 18-hour days and relentless preparation. I transformed my apartment into a research center, covering every surface with financial reports, market analyses, competitive assessments, and strategic projections. I studied every successful COO presentation I could find, analyzed every corporate transformation case study, interviewed every industry expert who would take my calls. But most importantly, I studied my own company with the intensity of a scientist examining a new species. I walked through every department, observing workflows and identifying inefficiencies. I reviewed 5 years of financial data, looking for patterns and trends that might reveal opportunities for growth. I conducted anonymous surveys with employees at every level, gathering insights about company culture and operational challenges. What I discovered was both encouraging and troubling. The company was successful, profitable, and well regarded in the industry, but it was also becoming complacent. Several of our competitors had begun implementing innovative strategies that were eroding our market share. Our client acquisition costs were rising while our profit margins were shrinking. Employee turnover in certain departments was significantly higher than industry averages. We were not failing, but we were not thriving either. We were coasting, and in business, coasting was the first step toward decline. My presentation began to take shape around a central theme: transformation through strategic innovation. I identified 17 specific areas where we could improve our operations, from technology integration to client service protocols. I developed detailed implementation plans with realistic timelines and measurable objectives. But the centerpiece of my presentation was something more ambitious: a complete reimagining of how we approached client relationships. Instead of simply responding to client needs, We would anticipate them. Instead of delivering good work, we would deliver transformational results. Instead of being a service provider, we would become a strategic partner. It was bold, risky, and absolutely necessary if we wanted to remain competitive in an evolving marketplace. As February approached, I began practicing my presentation obsessively. I delivered it to my bathroom mirror, to my empty living room, to the city skyline from my apartment balcony. I memorized every slide, every statistic, every transition. I was as prepared as humanly possible, but preparation could only take me so far. At some point, I would have to walk into that boardroom, face 12 of the most successful business leaders in the city, and convince them to bet their company's future on a woman who had been a junior employee just 3 years earlier. The weight of that responsibility was staggering. 3 days before my presentation, something unexpected happened. Sophie knocked on my office door. "Come in," I called, not looking up from the quarterly reports I was reviewing. She entered hesitantly, closing the door behind her with the careful movements of someone approaching a sleeping tiger. "Director Greer," she began, her voice formally professional. "I hope I am not interrupting anything important." I looked up at her with the neutral expression I had cultivated for all our professional interactions. "What do you need?" "Sophie." She stood in front of my desk, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, her posture rigid with nervousness. "I wanted to wish you luck," she said simply. I frowned, confused by the apparent non sequitur. "Luck with what?" "Your presentation to the board," she replied. "Everyone knows you are being considered for Janet's position, and everyone knows you are going to get it." The confidence in her voice surprised me. "Everyone knows no such thing," I said carefully. "There are several qualified candidates being considered." Sophie shook her head, a slight smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "With respect, Director, there are several people being considered, but there is only one qualified candidate." She paused, seeming to gather her courage for whatever she planned to say next. "You are extraordinary, Natalia. What you have accomplished, what you have become, it is remarkable. And not just because of where you started, but because of how you transformed everything that happened to you into something powerful." I studied her face, looking for any trace of manipulation or hidden agenda, but found only sincerity and something that looked almost like admiration. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands as if they might contain the answer to my question. "Because," she said finally, "I need you to know that I understand what I cost you. Not just the relationship, not just the trust, but the person you used to be. The woman who believed the best about people, who led with her heart instead of her head, who thought that kindness and loyalty were enough to protect her from the world." She looked up at me, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I helped kill that woman," she continued. "And while the person you became is incredible, successful, powerful, I know that transformation came at a price. I know you had to give up parts of yourself, softer parts, trusting parts, that you might have preferred to keep." The silence between us stretched until it became uncomfortable. "I am not looking for forgiveness," she said quickly. "I know I do not deserve it. But I needed you to know that I see what my choices cost you. And I needed you to know that I am genuinely proud of who you have become, even though I played a role in destroying who you used to be." I considered her words carefully, examining them for any hint of self-serving motivation, but found only raw honesty and genuine remorse. "Sophie," I said finally, "the woman I used to be was naive. She was trusting to a fault, optimistic without reason, vulnerable in ways that left her defenseless against people who would exploit her goodness." I stood up, walking around my desk to face her more directly. "You did not kill that woman," I continued. "You revealed her weaknesses. And in doing so, you forced me to become someone stronger, smarter, more resilient. Someone who could not be betrayed again because she no longer trusted blindly." Sophie's tears were flowing freely now, but she made no move to wipe them away. "The person I am today," I said, "exists because of what happened that night in the break room. Not despite it. Because of it. You and Marcus gave me the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, even though you had no intention of doing so. What gift? She whispered. You showed me that I was stronger than I knew. I walked back around my desk, signaling that our conversation was ending. Now, I said, my voice returning to its professional tone. Unless there is anything work-related you need to discuss, I have a presentation to finalize. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Thank you, Director Greer, for letting me say what I needed to say. Sophie, I called as she reached for the door handle. She turned back to me. Good work on the Morrison account this month. Your attention to detail has been excellent. A smile broke across her tear-stained face. The first genuine smile I had seen from her in 3 years. Thank you, she said. That means more than you know. After she left, I remained standing by my window, looking out at the city skyline as afternoon faded into evening. In 3 days, I would either achieve the pinnacle of professional success or face the most public failure of my career. But for the first time since that night in the break room, I felt something I had not expected to feel again. Peace. Not because Sophie had apologized, though her words had been meaningful. Not because I had forgiven her, though perhaps someday I might. But because I finally understood something that had taken me 3 years to learn. My success was not about revenge. It was about becoming who I was meant to be. The boardroom on the morning of February 7th was intimidating in ways I had not anticipated. The mahogany table seemed longer, the leather chairs more imposing, the floor-to-ceiling windows more vast. 12 of the most powerful business leaders in the city sat facing me, their expressions ranging from politely interested to openly skeptical. I recognized most of them from their photographs in business journals and newspaper articles. Margaret Chen, the venture capitalist who had built 3 companies from startup to billion-dollar valuations. Robert Martinez, the former CEO of a Fortune 500 manufacturing conglomerate. Diana Walsh, whose consulting firm advised governments and multinational corporations. These were not people who were easily impressed. At the head of the table sat Chairman William Harrison, a man whose reputation for brilliant strategic thinking was matched only by his intolerance for mediocrity. He had built Harrison Industries from a small family business into an international powerhouse, and his approval would be crucial to my success. Good morning, Ms. Greer, he said as I set up my presentation materials. We appreciate you taking the time to present your vision for our company's future. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. I am honored to be here. Janet Morrison sat at the far end of the table, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes warm with encouragement. She had been my advocate throughout this process, but today I was on my own. Before we begin, Chairman Harrison continued, I want to acknowledge that your candidacy for this position is unconventional. You are significantly younger than our other candidates, with less traditional executive experience. However, your performance over the past 3 years has been remarkable enough to warrant serious consideration. He paused, studying me with sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. That said, this position requires someone who can lead not just their own department, but the entire organization. Someone who can make difficult decisions that affect hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. Someone who can guide this company through whatever challenges the future might bring. The weight of his words settled over the room like a blanket. We are looking for our next leader, he said simply. Show us why that should be you. I stood, walked to the front of the room, and began the presentation of my life. Ladies and gentlemen, I said, my voice clear and confident despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. 3 years ago, I was a junior employee with big dreams and limited experience. Today, I stand before you as someone who has transformed every department I have touched, exceeded every goal I have been given, and generated more revenue in the past year than this company typically sees in 3. I clicked to my first slide, which showed a comprehensive overview of my achievements since joining the firm. But those accomplishments, impressive as they might be, are not why I should be your next chief operating officer. Eyebrows rose around the table. I should be your COO because I understand something that traditional experience alone cannot teach. I understand transformation. For the next 90 minutes, I walked them through the most comprehensive business strategy presentation I had ever created. I showed them exactly how our company could not just compete in an evolving marketplace, but dominate it. I presented detailed plans for revenue growth, operational efficiency, and strategic positioning that would make us the clear leader in our industry. But more than that, I showed them vision. I painted a picture of what our company could become. Not just a successful business, but a transformational force in the lives of our clients and employees. I demonstrated how we could leverage our existing strengths while addressing our current weaknesses, how we could maintain our culture while embracing necessary changes. I showed them the future, and I made it irresistible. When I finished, the room was completely silent. Chairman Harrison was the first to speak. "Ms. Greer," he said slowly, "this is one of the most sophisticated strategic presentations I have seen in 40 years of business leadership." My heart hammered against my ribcage. "Your analysis of our current market position is accurate. Your identification of growth opportunities is insightful, and your implementation strategies are both ambitious and realistic." He paused, glancing around the table at his fellow board members. "However," he continued, and my stomach dropped, "we have some concerns about your ability to manage the interpersonal challenges that come with executive leadership. Leading a department is very different from leading an entire organization." Margaret Chen leaned forward. "Can you tell us about a time when you had to make a difficult personnel decision?" she asked. "Something that required you to balance the needs of the individual against the needs of the organization?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. And suddenly, I knew exactly what to say. 6 months ago, I began. I discovered that one of my employees had been consistently underperforming, not because they lacked ability, but because they were struggling with personal issues that were affecting their professional focus. I thought about Sophie, about the months of watching her decline, about the choice I had made to help her succeed rather than punish her for past mistakes. Traditional management wisdom would suggest that I should have initiated disciplinary action, documented their failures, and begun the process of replacement. Instead, I chose to invest in their potential. I described how I had worked with the employee to identify the root causes of their performance issues, how I had provided additional training and support, how I had created accountability structures that helped them succeed. The result, I continued, was not just improved performance from that individual, but improved morale throughout the entire department. Other employees saw that we were committed to their success, not just their productivity. It was a true story, even if I had omitted certain details about my history with the employee in question. Robert Martinez nodded approvingly. "Leadership is not just about making tough decisions," he said. "It is about making smart decisions, even when they are not the obvious ones." The questions continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from financial forecasting to crisis management to long-term strategic planning. Each query was designed to test not just my knowledge, but my judgment, my character, my ability to think beyond my current level of responsibility. I answered each one with the confidence that comes from thorough preparation and genuine expertise. Finally, Chairman Harrison called for a brief recess, so the board could deliberate privately. I waited in Janet Morrison's office, trying not to pace, trying not to second-guess every answer I had given, trying not to imagine all the ways this could go wrong. "You were magnificent," Janet said quietly. "I have never seen a more impressive presentation." "But was it enough?" I asked. "I think you are about to find out." 20 minutes later, I was called back into the boardroom. Chairman Harrison stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. "Ms. Greer," he began, "the board has reached a unanimous decision." My heart stopped. "We would be honored to offer you the position of Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately upon Janet's retirement." The room erupted in applause, but all I could hear was the sound of my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. I had done it. I had actually done it. I was going to be the Chief Operating Officer of the company where 3 years ago, I had been just another junior employee whose heart was broken in a break room. As I shook hands with each board member, accepted their congratulations and well wishes, I thought about that night when my world had collapsed. I thought about the promise I had made to Sophie, about the determination that had carried me through the darkest period of my life, about the transformation that had brought me to this moment. I had kept my promise. Sophie would never be above me again, in any way. But more than that, I had discovered something about myself that I never could have learned without being broken first. I was unbreakable. My first day as Chief Operating Officer began with the same senior staff meeting where, 3 years earlier, I had been introduced as Director of Operations. But this time, the dynamic was completely different. This time, I was not just another employee being promoted. I was the second most powerful person in the building. The conference room felt smaller somehow. Or perhaps I had simply grown larger. The mahogany table that had once seemed so imposing now felt like exactly the right size for someone of my stature. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view that matched my new perspective. Elevated, expansive, commanding. The senior staff filed in promptly at 9 a.m., their faces showing a mixture of respect, curiosity, and in some cases, barely concealed ambition. They understood that my elevation changed the entire power structure of the organization, creating opportunities for some and obstacles for others. Janet Morrison, now serving her final weeks as CEO before her retirement, took her place at the head of the table with obvious pride. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "I am pleased to formally introduce your new Chief Operating Officer, Natalia Greer." The applause was immediate and genuine, a recognition not just of my appointment, but of the journey that had brought me here. I stood, taking my place at the table in the chair that would soon be permanently mine, and looked around the room at the faces of people who would now report directly or indirectly to me. And there, in her usual spot near the middle of the table, sat Sophie. She was looking directly at me. But her expression was not what I had expected. There was no resentment, no bitterness, no trace of the devastation I might have felt in her position. Instead, there was something that looked almost like pride. "Thank you all," I began, my voice carrying the authority that came with my new role. "I am honored to have this opportunity to lead our organization into its next phase of growth and excellence." I outlined my vision for the coming months, the strategic initiatives we would be implementing, the goals we would be working toward together. I spoke about accountability and opportunity, about innovation and tradition, about the balance between ambition and sustainability. But throughout the presentation, I found myself occasionally glancing at Sophie, wondering what she was thinking, how she was processing this latest chapter in our intertwined story. When the meeting concluded, she approached me as others filed out. "Congratulations, Chief Operating Officer Greer," she said, extending her hand for a professional handshake. I accepted the gesture, noting that her grip was firm, confident, entirely appropriate for the moment. "Thank you, Sophie. I meant what I said before," she continued, lowering her voice so others could not hear. "You deserve this. All of it." I studied her face, looking for any hint of false sincerity, but found only genuine warmth and respect. "I appreciate that," I replied. She nodded, then turned to leave, but paused at the conference room door. "Natalia," she said, using my first name for the first time in years, "I know our history is complicated, but I want you to know, if there is ever anything I can do to support your success in this role, anything at all, you only have to ask." The offer was unexpected, and somehow moving in its simplicity. "I will keep that in mind," I said. After she left, I remained in the conference room for several minutes, absorbing the magnitude of what had just occurred. 3 years ago, I had stood in this same room and made a promise about never being beneath anyone again. Today, that promise had reached its ultimate fulfillment. But as I looked out the windows at the city sprawling below, I realized that my journey was not really about revenge. And it was not really about Sophie. It was about discovering what I was capable of when everything I thought I knew about myself was stripped away. It was about learning that betrayal could be a beginning rather than an ending. It was about understanding that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best thing that could ever happen to you. 6 months into my tenure as Chief Operating Officer, The company was thriving in ways that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Revenue was up 62%. Client retention had reached 99.4%. Employee satisfaction scores were the highest in company history. We had not just met our goals, we had shattered them. My leadership style, which combined strategic thinking with genuine care for employee development, had created a culture of excellence that permeated every department. People were not just working harder, they were working smarter, with a sense of purpose and pride that was visible in everything from client presentations to interdepartmental communications. The success had not gone unnoticed outside our organization either. Industry publications were writing articles about our transformation. Competitors were trying to recruit our employees. Other companies were requesting consultations to learn about our strategies. I was being invited to speak at conferences, serve on advisory boards, participate in executive forums. My name was appearing on lists of rising business leaders and influential women in corporate America. The recognition was gratifying, but it was not what drove me. What drove me was the knowledge that I had built something extraordinary from the wreckage of my personal devastation, that I had taken the worst betrayal of my life and used it as raw material for the greatest success of my career. That transformation had required sacrifices, of course. My personal life remained virtually non-existent. I worked 12 to 14-hour days, spent weekends reviewing strategic plans and financial projections, and had not been on a date since Marcus had destroyed my ability to trust romantic relationships. Some nights, as I sat alone in my executive suite reviewing quarterly reports, I wondered if the price of success had been too high, if perhaps I had gained the whole world, but lost something essential about who I used to be. But then I would remember that night in the break room. Remember the humiliation and devastation. Remember the choice I had made to transform pain into power. And I knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. The anniversary of that night arrived on a Tuesday in late September. 3 years to the day since I had walked into the break room and discovered Marcus kissing Sophie. Since my world had collapsed and been rebuilt into something stronger, I marked the occasion by doing something I had never done before. I left work early, not to wallow in memories or nurse old wounds, but to celebrate. To acknowledge how far I had traveled from that heartbroken woman who had scattered her files across the break room floor. I drove to the hillside overlooking the city, parked at a scenic overlook, and looked down at the sprawling metropolis where I had built my empire. Somewhere down there, Sophie was probably finishing her workday at the same desk she had occupied for 5 years. She had continued to improve her performance, had even received a small promotion to senior coordinator, but remained essentially where she had always been, somewhere else. Marcus was. I had no idea where Marcus was, and I realized I did not care. Both of them had become footnotes in the story of my transformation, catalysts for change rather than central characters. The real story was about me, about the woman I had become, about the discovery that strength could emerge from devastation, that betrayal could become motivation, that the worst night of your life could become the foundation for the best years of your life. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I made a decision. It was time to start the next chapter, not just professionally, where new challenges and opportunities awaited, but personally. It was time to stop letting the past define my future. Time to risk trusting again. Time to open my heart to possibilities beyond corporate success. The woman who had been betrayed 3 years ago had needed to become hard, strategic, emotionally invulnerable in order to survive and thrive. But the woman I was today, the chief operating officer who commanded respect and wielded real power, she was strong enough to risk being vulnerable again. Strong enough to choose love without losing herself. Strong enough to trust without becoming naive. Strong enough to remain powerful while also remaining human. As I drove back down the hill toward my apartment, I thought about the journey that had brought me here, the pain that had nearly destroyed me, the determination that had saved me, the success that had vindicated me. But mostly, I thought about the future, about the woman I was still becoming, about the life I was ready to build, not as a reaction to betrayal, but as a celebration of everything I had discovered I could be. The break room had been my ending. Everything that came after had been my beginning. And the best, I knew, was yet to come. 2 years later, I stood before the largest business conference in the country, delivering the keynote address to 3,000 executives and entrepreneurs from around the world. The title of my speech was Transformation Through Adversity: How Setbacks Become Comebacks. I spoke about resilience and determination, about turning pain into power and obstacles into opportunities. I shared strategies for professional growth and leadership development, offering practical advice for anyone seeking to advance their career. But I did not tell them about Marcus and Sophie. I did not share the specific details of the betrayal that had catalyzed my transformation, because the story was no longer about them. It was about the universal truth that our greatest failures often precede our greatest successes. That rock bottom can become the foundation for heights we never imagined we could reach. The audience gave me a standing ovation that lasted nearly 5 minutes. Afterward, during the networking reception, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "Ms. Greer," she said, "your speech, it gave me hope. I am going through the worst time of my life right now, and I had given up on the idea that things could get better." I looked at her, seeing something of my former self in her expression of pain and determination. "What happened to you?" I asked gently. "My business partner, who was also my fiancé, stole our company's assets and disappeared with my best friend," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I lost everything: my business, my relationship, my trust in people I loved." The parallels were striking, but not surprising. Betrayal took many forms, but its impact was always devastating. "I am sorry," I said sincerely. "That kind of betrayal is one of the most difficult things a person can experience." "How did you get through it?" she asked. "How did you find the strength to rebuild?" I considered her question carefully, wanting to give her an answer that was both honest and helpful. "I realized," I said finally, "that the person who betrayed me had given me an unexpected gift. They had shown me exactly what I was made of, exactly how strong I could become when everything else was stripped away." She looked confused. "The woman I was before the betrayal," I continued, "was dependent on other people's approval and support for her sense of self-worth. She was strong, but only within the safety of relationships she trusted. When those relationships were destroyed, she had to discover a different kind of strength." I paused, thinking about the journey from that break room to this conference stage. The woman I became afterward was strong in her own right. She did not need anyone's approval or support to know her value. She had tested herself against the worst possible circumstances and emerged victorious. The young woman was listening intently. "That does not mean the betrayal was good," I clarified. "It means that my response to it was transformational. I chose to use the worst experience of my life as raw material for the best version of myself." She nodded, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "Your betrayal," I told her, "is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of a better one, if you choose to write it that way." 6 months later, I received an email from her. She had started a new company, secured significant funding, and was on track to exceed her previous business's revenue within the first year. "You were right," she wrote. "The betrayal was not the end. It was the beginning of everything I was meant to become." Stories like hers reminded me why I had chosen to share my experience publicly, why I continued to speak at conferences and mentor young professionals, why I used my platform to help others transform their setbacks into comebacks. Not because revenge was sweet, though there was admittedly some satisfaction in having turned my betrayers into footnotes in my success story, but because transformation was possible, because strength could emerge from devastation, because sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the foundation for the best thing that could ever happen to you, and because every person who has ever been betrayed, broken, or defeated deserves to know that their story is not over. It is just beginning. Thank you for watching our channel. If this story of transformation and triumph resonated with you, please subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. Your support means everything to us, and it helps us continue sharing powerful stories of resilience, growth, and success. Remember, no matter what challenges you are facing today, Your comeback story is waiting to be written. Subscribe now, and let us continue this journey of inspiration together.